She was fired for helping a Hell's Angels disabled son. But what happened next changed everyone's lives. A kind young nurse thought she was just doing the right thing, comforting a little boy who couldn't walk. But when her boss found out who the boy's father was, her life came crashing down. Now jobless, homeless, and branded a traitor, she's forced to choose between saving her reputation or saving the child who stole her heart. But nothing could prepare her for what happens when that ex-biker opens his door. And his heart. Because behind the tattoos and the rumors hides a truth this small town isn't ready to face. When kindness becomes scandal and faith meets fury, one act of compassion will test the limits of forgiveness, courage, and love itself. So, when the whole world turns against you for doing good, would you still do it anyway? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights in Pine Hollow Community Hospital buzzed softly above the quiet halls. It was nearly midnight, and most of the patients were asleep. Meadow Carter moved carefully through the pediatric wing, her white sneakers making no sound on the waxed linoleum floor. She carried a tray of medicine, a small flashlight tucked into her pocket, and a heart full of worry for one particular child. Room 212. Tommy Jensen. He was only 8, but the accident that had taken his ability to walk made him seem older. His big brown eyes held too much pain for a child. When Meadow peeked through the half-open door, she saw him lying awake, staring at the ceiling. His toy car sat on the bedside table, missing one wheel. She knocked gently on the doorframe. "Hey there, champ. Couldn't sleep again?" Tommy turned his head, his face lighting up. "Hi, Miss Meadow. My legs hurt." "I know, sweetheart." Meadow stepped in and set her tray down. She lowered her voice. "I brought something special tonight." She pulled a soft blue blanket from her bag, one she'd knitted herself during slow shifts, and tucked it around him. The blanket smelled faintly of lavender soap. Tommy sighed and relaxed. "Better?" she asked. He nodded. "It's warm. Kinda feels like Mom." Her throat tightened. She knew his mother had died 2 years ago, but she didn't want to bring up old pain. "Then it's a good blanket," she said softly. From the hallway came the sound of heels clicking, sharp, quick, and familiar. Meadow's stomach sank. Head nurse Evelyn Dorsey. She moved quickly, turning off the bedside lamp and lowering her voice. "Try to rest now, Tommy." Before she could slip out, the door swung open. Evelyn stood there, arms crossed, her expression as cold as the tile floor. "Carter," she said, her tone clipped. "What are you doing in here? You're off duty." I just wanted to check on Tommy," Meadow stammered. "He was in pain." "That's not your responsibility anymore. You're not assigned to pediatrics." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "And what's that blanket?" "It's from home. I thought it might—" "Unauthorized personal items," Evelyn snapped. "You know the rules." Tommy's small voice cut in. "Please don't be mad at her. She was helping." Evelyn didn't even glance his way. "This isn't about kindness. It's about protocol. You may go, Miss Carter. Now." Meadow's hands trembled as she backed out of the room. Her heart pounded with frustration. Helping a hurting child was wrong? How could it be? By the time she reached the break room, tears blurred her vision. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, the air colder. She sat down, folded her hands, and whispered a shaky prayer. "Lord, I was only trying to help. Please don't let me regret doing what's right." The next morning, the hospital board called her in. The room was all glass and chrome, the kind of place where compassion went to die. The HR manager cleared his throat and began reading from a file. "Miss Carter, you are being terminated effective immediately for violation of hospital policy. unauthorized use of medical resources, and failure to comply with supervisory instructions. Meadow sat still, her fingers clutching the strap of her purse. "All I did was bring a blanket," she whispered. Evelyn Dorsey, seated across the table, didn't look up from her papers. "You crossed a professional line, Meadow. You made a personal connection with a family we're not equipped to manage." A family, that's what she called them. Not a child, not a grieving father. A problem to manage. Meadow rose slowly, her voice steady but her heart aching. "Then maybe that's what's wrong with this place. We treat rules better than people." The HR manager avoided her eyes. "Please turn in your badge." She did, and with it, she turned in the last bit of safety she had left. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and bright. The parking lot shimmered under a pale morning sun. Meadow hugged her coat tighter, trying to keep the wind and the shame from cutting too deep. That's when she saw him. A tall man leaning against a black motorcycle, his leather jacket worn and his expression unreadable. Tattoos crawled up his arms, and his hands were rough, but his eyes, gray and tired, softened when they met hers. "You're the nurse," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered. "And you must be Tommy's father." He nodded. "They told me you got fired for helping my boy." Meadow hesitated, unsure what to say. "I just did what anyone would do." He snorted. "No, not anyone." For a long moment they just stood there, two strangers bound by one act of compassion. He dug in his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $20 bill. "Let me pay you back for the blanket or whatever they're mad about." She shook her head. "You can't buy kindness, you just pass it on." A flicker of respect crossed his face. "You're braver than most people I know." As he mounted his bike, the engine roared to life, deep and steady. "Name's Jackson Jensen," he said over the sound. "If you ever need a hand, we're out by Route 16, Blue Farmhouse. My boy thinks the world of you." Then he was gone, leaving the faint smell of gasoline and a question echoing in her heart. Was this the end of her story? Or the beginning of something she didn't yet understand? That night, Meadow sat in her tiny apartment, staring at an eviction notice taped to the door. The landlord wanted her out by the end of the week. No job, no rent, no mercy. She picked up the little toy car Tommy had given her that last night in the hospital. Its missing wheel spun loosely. "Guess we're both a little broken," she whispered. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. She closed her eyes and prayed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but if you need me somewhere else, show me." And somewhere, miles away, in a farmhouse that smelled of oil and rain, a little boy prayed too, for the nurse who had cared when no one else would. Morning light slid across the floor of Meadow's small apartment, tracing a bright line over the cardboard boxes she had saved for someday. She woke before her alarm, the kind of waking that came when sleep was thin and full of worries. The eviction notice rustled on the door each time a draft moved through. She read it again, even though she already knew the words. End of week. Vacate. It felt like someone had stamped a big red "denied" across her life. She made coffee on the old stove and stood by the window with the chipped white frame. Outside, Pine Hollow stirred awake. A dog barked. A school bus hissed at the corner. She imagined Tommy, already up, waiting for someone to help him into his chair. The thought put a steadying hand on her heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord, Mrs. Clara Whittle. "Please return your key by Friday. No exceptions. I run a decent building." Meadow typed, "I understand. I'm looking for work." Then she deleted it. It would not change anything. She set the phone down and folded her hands. "Lord," she whispered, eyes on the thin gray sky. I don't want to be angry. Help me stay kind. Help me know what to do next. She showered, dressed in her plain blue sweater and black slacks, and tied her hair back in a neat knot. She did not have a uniform anymore, but she carried herself like she still did. Old habits of care did not vanish overnight. She packed a small tote bag with her badge lanyard, the extra pair of hospital shoes, and a stack of folded scrubs to return. On top, she laid the little toy car with the loose wheel. She touched it for courage and left. The hospital sat white and square against the bright morning, too clean to hold so much sorrow. Meadow walked through the front doors, past the gift shop with the light-up balloons and plastic flowers. The woman at the counter glanced at her, and then quickly looked away. News traveled fast in a small town. At HR, she turned in her badge and signed a paper. The man behind the desk cleared his throat. "There will be 2 weeks' severance," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Your final check will be mailed." "Thank you," Meadow said, because politeness was one thing no one could take from her. When she stepped into the main corridor to return her scrubs to laundry, she heard the click of heels. Evelyn Dorsey came toward her with a clipboard against her chest like a shield. Her lipstick was a sharp red line. "Carter," Evelyn said, "I trust you're returning property." "Yes," Meadow replied, "and I'm going upstairs to say goodbye to the kids." "That won't be necessary," Evelyn said quickly. "We need to minimize confusion." "Children aren't confused by love," Meadow said, keeping her voice gentle. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We also need to minimize liability." For a second, the two women stood like opposite sides of a bridge that had not yet fallen. Far off, a monitor beeped. Someone laughed by the nurses' station. Life kept going, steady and unaware. "I'll be brief," Meadow said, and she continued down the hall. The pediatric wing smelled like soap and crayons. Meadow paused at the door of room 212, then knocked and stepped in. Tommy sat propped on pillows, hair sticking up, face pale but brighter than last night. His chair waited in the corner with a folded blanket. The blue one she had brought was tucked around his legs. "Miss Meadow," he said, smiling wide, "I thought you were gone." "Not before I say goodbye," she said, and pulled a chair close. She spoke of small things first, the sunshine, the birds she had heard on the walk-in, because big things needed gentle steps. "How's the pain this morning?" "Better," he said. "They gave me the orange one, and it makes me sleepy. Daddy said we're going home today." "Home is good," she said, and tried to mean it. A shadow edged the doorway. Jackson leaned there, a figure of leather and worry. He lifted 2 fingers in a greeting. Meadow nodded back. His eyes flicked from her tote bag to her careworn face and softened. "You came," he said. "I did," Meadow answered. "I needed to." Evelyn appeared again a minute later, the clipboard now tucked tight in her elbow. "We're processing discharge," she announced, as if the family did not already know. "Please be ready within the hour." "We're ready now," Jackson said, his voice even. "Just waiting on the papers." Evelyn made a note. "We'll advise." She left, and the air felt lighter. Meadow turned back to Tommy. "Do you remember the stretches we practiced?" He nodded. 10 counts. Slow. Then the ankle. Circles. "That's right. Your legs will get stronger, little by little." Jackson watched, arms folded. "They say he needs a schedule," he said. "PT 3 times a week. I called around. No one would take us." Meadow looked up. She saw the truth he had not said. "No one will take me." "Sometimes people see the jacket before they see the man," she said. "It isn't fair." He held her gaze. "I'm trying to do right. I can tell, she said simply. A volunteer came with a small certificate. You are brave, Tommy, and a helium balloon that bumped the ceiling. Tommy giggled and tugged the ribbon. When discharge finally came, Jackson signed and frowned at the stack of instructions. This is a lot of words, he muttered. Meadow stood with him at the counter, tracing the lines with her finger. This part means to check his skin for redness, she said, especially after he's in the chair. This part shows how to lock the braces. That part lists numbers if anything scares you. He nodded, listening hard. You talk plain, he said. Makes it less scary. At the elevator, Meadow squeezed Tommy's hand. You'll do great, she said. You're strong. He pulled her closer and whispered, Are you coming to our house? She glanced at Jackson. He met her look without blinking. His voice came quiet, almost shy. If you can, we could use help. I'd pay you. Meadow opened her mouth, closed it. Behind her, the doors slid open. I need to think, she said. I'll give you an answer soon. Jackson nodded like a man who knew how to wait. Downstairs, the automatic doors breathed her out into noon light. The town looked the same as it had that morning, but nothing inside her was the same. She sat on a bench beneath a small maple tree. Red leaves fluttered down and clung to her sweater. She brushed them off and stared at her hands. Help them. The thought came as steady as a heartbeat. Help them. Lord, she whispered, if this is from you, keep opening the way. If it isn't, close it tight. She stood and walked toward Main Street. She had work to do. Not paid work, but necessary work all the same. She stopped at the thrift store and found a used plastic tub with a lid, big enough to hold bandages and lotion. She bought it for $2. Next, she went to the pharmacy, where the clerk looked at her with that hard little squint that said, I heard about you. Meadow kept her voice kind and ordered only what was proper. Lotion for skin pressure, alcohol wipes, the cheapest disposable gloves, a small gel pack for swelling. She paid with cash and put the receipt in her bag like proof she still belonged to the world of rules. On the way home, she detoured down Maple Lane, where the church rose like a white ship in a green sea. The doors were propped open for midweek prayer. She stood just inside, the cool dimness wrapping around her. A woman in the third pew glanced back, and then leaned to whisper to her friend. Meadow felt the whisper pass like a cold breeze down her back, but she stepped forward anyway. Pastor Paul sat near the front, reading. He looked up and smiled, then saw her face, and the smile slipped into worry. Meadow, he said softly. I heard. I know, she said. She did not want to pick at the wound. Pastor, I might take a job helping a family. Which family? Jackson Jensen and his boy. His eyebrows rose before he smoothed his expression. That could cause talk. There's already talk, she said, but a child needs care. He hesitated, then nodded. We're called to mercy. We're also called to wisdom. I'm trying to hold both. He closed the Bible on his knee. We'll pray for you. Thank you, she said. She wanted to ask if she could use the church pantry for supplies, but pride made her hold back. She did not want charity. She wanted fellowship. Sometimes the two were the same. Sometimes they were not. Back at the apartment, she set the plastic tub on her small table and sorted supplies inside. The room felt already half empty, as if it were letting her go before she had truly left. She opened a box and began to pack winter clothes she would not need right away. When the knock came, she startled. She opened the door to find Mrs. Clara Whittle on the landing, clutching a mail bundle like a shield. Clara's silver hair was piled high and tidy. Her mouth was a firm line of duty. I brought your mail, Clara said. And I'm sorry about your situation. The pause around the word was thick. "Thank you," Meadow said, taking the envelopes. Clara glanced past her at the boxes. "Moving along quickly, I see. Best not to drag things out when reputations are at stake." "I understand," Meadow said, though she did not. Clara fidgeted with the mail. "People are saying you were involved with one of those biker men. I hope that isn't true." Meadow's voice stayed calm. "I cared for a boy who needed help, and I spoke to his father with respect. That's the truth." Clara sniffed. "Well, it's not my place to judge." She paused, then added the very thing that always followed that sentence. "But if you could have the key ready on Friday, that would be best." When the door closed, Meadow let herself lean against it for just a moment. She breathed in, breathed out. She picked up her phone, stared at the blank screen, then scrolled to the unknown number Jackson had called from the day before. She typed a message, erased it, typed again. "I can come by tomorrow afternoon to assess what Tommy needs. No pay until we both agree it's right. Meadow." The dots appeared and vanished, appeared again. At last his answer came. "Thank you, we'll be here. Blue Farmhouse on 16. Soup on the stove if you're hungry." She smiled, despite the day, then caught herself. Don't get ahead of hope, she thought. Walk it, don't run it. The afternoon thinned into evening. Meadow washed her dishes and set them to dry on a towel. She packed 2 more boxes. As the sun slid behind the rooftops, the room cooled. She pulled on a sweater and opened the Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. A leaf pressed long ago fell out and fluttered to the table. She smoothed it gently and tucked it back between the pages. She read, "Let us not grow weary in doing good." Her eyes stung. "All right," she whispered. "I won't." Her phone buzzed again. A different number. "This is Greg Lowell, Hospital Administration. A statement will run in tomorrow's paper to clarify the circumstances of your termination for policy breach. Do not represent yourself as affiliated with Pine Hollow Community Hospital in any capacity." Meadow stared at the words. They felt like a door slamming, loud and final. She typed, "Understood." Then she put the phone face down and rested her forehead on her folded arms. For a long minute, the silence roared. A soft knock sounded again. She startled and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. When she opened the door this time, Pastor Paul's wife, Sarah, stood there with a small covered dish and an awkward smile. "I hope you don't mind," Sarah said. "I made a casserole and thought you might be too tired to cook." Warmth moved through Meadow like a small fire catching. Thank you," she said. Sarah stepped in and set the dish on the counter. She looked around at the boxes and the tidy stacks. "Change is hard," she said, "even when it's holy." Meadow let out a shaky laugh. "I don't know about holy." Sarah met her gaze. "The Lord writes straight with crooked lines. You've always trusted that." Meadow nodded. "I'm trying." Sarah squeezed her hand. Try isn't failure. After Sarah left, Meadow ate a small serving, then covered the rest and labeled it for tomorrow. She set a glass of water by the bed, turned off the lamp, and lay in the narrow stripe of streetlight that fell across the quilt. Sleep took a while to find her. When it came, it brought dreams of wheels turning and doors opening. She woke once, long after midnight, to a low rumble in the distance, a motorcycle on the highway, then another, then silence. For a few seconds, she pictured a blue farmhouse with a light burning in the kitchen and a boy who could not sleep. She imagined a father standing by a window, wondering if Hope was a stranger or a guest. Morning would answer some of that. Not all, but some. At dawn, the first birds called from the trees along the alley. Meadow rose and dressed. She wrote a list on a scrap of paper. Measuring tape for ramps, notebook, pen, gentle lotion, extra socks, Bible. She tucked the paper in her tote with the plastic tub of supplies and the toy car, then set her apartment key on the entry table to remind herself that time was moving. Before she left, she stood in the middle of the room and took one slow look around. "Thank you for this place," she said aloud to the empty air. "Thank you for whatever comes next." She locked the door, heard the snick of the bolt, and felt something settle inside her. Not joy yet, not relief, but a small, steady yes. On the street, the morning had that bright look that comes after a night of clear thinking. She walked to the bus stop with her tote on her shoulder and a plan in her pocket. At the corner, a newspaper box clanged as a man loaded the morning edition. He slid one paper out and skimmed the front page. His eyebrows arched at a headline she could not see. He looked up as she passed, looked again as if trying to match her to something he'd read, and then looked away. The town was deciding what story to tell about her. She could not stop them, but she could write the next chapter with her hands and her feet. The bus lurched and growled, then carried her toward Route 16, past the church, past Mrs. Whittle's building, past the hospital that had been hers and was not anymore. Pine trees thickened along the road. Fields opened, wide and gold. And there, at last, sat the blue farmhouse with the white porch and the ramp that needed fixing. Smoke curled from the chimney. A dog barked once, and then wagged itself into a circle. Meadow stepped down and adjusted the strap of her tote. She walked up the path, heart steady, prayer simple. "Let me be useful. Let me be kind." The front door opened before she could knock. Jackson stood there, coffee mug in hand, eyes shadowed from a short night's sleep. He took in her tote, the plastic tub, the calm on her face. "You came," he said again, as if it was still a surprise. "I said I would," she replied. He looked past her toward the road, then back at her, and something like hope moved in his eyes. "Soup's on the stove," he said, voice rough. "Boys at the table. We saved you a seat." She stepped inside. The kitchen smelled like onions and thyme and a life learning to be new. The day opened in front of her. Not easy, not safe, but good. And for the first time since the hospital door closed behind her, Meadow felt the floor under her feet like a promise. The work was waiting. The family was waiting. The next right thing was here. Night would come again. Trouble would come too. But for now, morning held. And she was ready to meet it. The dirt road to the blue farmhouse curved through rows of rust-colored trees. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and Meadow felt the morning chill through her sweater as she walked up the path. Her tote bag felt heavy, but her heart beat lighter than it had in days. This was where she was meant to be. She felt it in her bones, even if she didn't yet know why. The farmhouse was older than she expected. Faded blue paint peeling from its siding, the front porch slanted slightly to one side, a rusty wind chime clinking gently above the steps. A carved wooden sign hung near the door. "Jensen family, no trespassing." The words should have scared her, but they didn't. She knocked twice. A muffled voice called out, "Doors open." When she stepped inside, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. The smell of soup simmering on the stove mixed with something earthy. Motor oil, maybe? Tools were scattered across the kitchen table beside a pile of mail. At the far end of the room, Tommy sat in a wheelchair with a bowl of cereal in front of him, grinning. "You came," he said. "I told Daddy you would." Jackson stood near the sink, one hand resting on a chipped coffee mug. He looked rougher in daylight. Scruffy beard, sleeves rolled to the elbows, grease on his forearm. But his eyes, That storm gray color softened when he saw her. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show," he said. "I said I'd help," Meadow replied, setting down her tote. "And I meant it." He nodded once, almost shyly. "Boy's been up since dawn waiting on you." Tommy laughed. "I wanted to show her my ramp. Daddy and Uncle Bulldog built it." "Uncle Bulldog?" Meadow asked, smiling. "One of my buddies," Jackson explained, drying his hands on a towel. "Big guy, louder than a bear, but good with tools. You'll see him around." She followed Tommy's excited pointing to the back porch, where a wooden ramp led down to the yard. It was sturdy but uneven, one side slanting just enough to make her frown. "You built that yourselves?" "More or less," Jackson said. "Didn't exactly have a manual." "It's good work," she said gently, "but the slope's a little steep. I can help fix that later if you've got boards and nails." He raised a brow. "You handy with tools, too?" "I'm handy with whatever needs fixing," she said, and that made him chuckle, a deep, surprised sound that warmed the room. They spent the morning in easy rhythm. Meadow unpacked her supplies and checked Tommy's braces, explaining each step so both father and son understood. She cleaned his skin, adjusted his chair cushion, and wrote notes in her small spiral notebook. Jackson watched quietly from across the room, his rough hands fidgeting with his mug. "You make it look easy," he said finally. "It isn't," she replied softly, "but it gets easier when people care." That line hung between them for a while. When lunchtime came, Meadow offered to set the table. She found old, mismatched plates in a cabinet and poured soup from the pot. It was simple chicken and noodles, but the smell made her mouth water. As they ate, Tommy talked non-stop, about cartoons, about the neighbor's dog, about the time his dad tried to make pancakes and set off the smoke alarm. Jackson groaned good-naturedly while Meadow laughed. "He's not lying," Jackson said. "Smoke alarm still flinches when I walk by." The sound of laughter filled the house, a sound that had been missing for a long time. Even Jackson seemed surprised by it. After lunch, Tommy grew tired. Meadow helped him back to his room, lifted his small legs onto the bed, and covered him with the blanket she'd made. His eyelids drooped, and within minutes, he was asleep. When she stepped back into the kitchen, Jackson was waiting. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "He hasn't slept that easy in months," he said quietly. "Pain wears on kids," she said. "So does loneliness." He nodded. "I'm not much good at soft things. Never was." "Then it's a good thing I am," she replied gently. He studied her for a long moment. "You know, folks in town. They don't think much of me. Not since my old crew days." "I've heard things," Meadow admitted, "but I prefer to see people for myself." That made him look down, jaw tightening. "You'll see plenty then. Some of it ain't pretty." "I've worked in hospitals," she said softly. "Pretty isn't a requirement for good." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, Jackson cleared his throat. "Look, I can't pay what the hospital did, but I can give you room and board, a bit of cash every week. You'd have your own space, the small guest room. I could really use help keeping the boys' schedule right." Meadow hesitated. It was a big step, moving in with a man the town already whispered about. But she thought of Tommy's smile and how his little hands clutched hers. She thought of her empty apartment and her eviction notice. And she thought of the verse she'd read that morning. "Let us not grow weary in doing good." "All right," she said. "I'll stay, for as long as Tommy needs me." Jackson let out a breath she didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "You're doing more than you know." She smiled. "I'm not here to do more. Just the right thing." He grinned faintly. Seems like those are the same thing when it's you. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Meadow sat on the porch steps with a mug of tea. Crickets sang, and the air glowed gold over the fields. Jackson joined her, wiping his hands on a rag after working in the shed. "Tommy's out cold again," he said, sitting beside her. "Haven't seen him sleep that deep since the accident." "You built him a safe place," she said. "Now he finally believes it." He nodded. "Took me long enough." They sat in silence, watching the wind move through the trees. "Most people don't stick around once they hear my name," he said after a while. "They see the tattoos, the record, the bike, and that's all they need to know." Meadow sipped her tea. "Then I guess they're missing the best part of the story." He gave her a sideways glance. "You really think there's a best part?" "I do," she said. "I think you just haven't told it yet." Something shifted in his eyes, like a door opening a crack to let light in. When she went to bed that night, Meadow found her room simple but clean. A narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the yard. On the windowsill sat a jar of wildflowers Tommy must have picked earlier that week. She set her Bible beside the flowers, turned down the quilt, and knelt by the bed. "Lord," she whispered, "thank you for bringing me here. Help me bring peace into this house. Help me be kind even when it's hard." From down the hall, faint music drifted through the quiet. Jackson's rough voice humming a tune on his old guitar, gentle and low. It was a song about mercy. And as Meadow lay down to rest, she smiled because she could feel it growing in this house. Slow, fragile, but real. The next few mornings passed like the slow turning of a wheel. Steady, careful, and full of quiet work. Meadow's days began before sunrise and ended long after Tommy was asleep. Each dawn found her standing by the kitchen window, watching the mist roll over the fields, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. It was peaceful here. The old farmhouse creaked when the wind pushed against it, and the roosters in the neighbor's yard crowed right on time. Tommy's therapy routine became the rhythm of her life. They stretched his legs first thing in the morning, using gentle pressure to wake up muscles that hadn't been moved in too long. Meadow always kept her voice cheerful, even when Tommy winced or bit his lip to keep from crying. "You're doing amazing," she'd say softly. "Every inch counts, remember?" He nodded, breathing through the pain, and she could see in his eyes that he believed her. By the third day, Jackson began joining them at the table, helping hold the braces steady and learning how to lock them properly. He didn't talk much at first, just followed her lead, watching everything she did. But every now and then, Meadow caught him smiling at Tommy's progress, and each time, the smile seemed to come a little easier. One morning, when she was setting up Tommy's walker, she noticed Jackson watching her from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, his voice quieter than usual. "You really don't quit, do you?" Meadow turned, her hair catching the sunlight. "Not when someone's depending on me." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You know, I tried to do these stretches myself a few weeks ago." He cried. "Wouldn't talk to me for a day." She smiled gently. "He doesn't need perfect, Jackson. He just needs steady." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "You got that covered." Later that afternoon, Meadow took Tommy outside for fresh air. The ramp was still too steep, but she steadied his chair carefully as they rolled onto the porch. The sun felt warm on their faces, and Tommy grinned when the family dog, an old brown mutt named Hank, trotted over to sit by his side. "You think Hank likes me?" Tommy asked. "Likes you?" Meadow said with mock surprise. "He's guarding you, see? That tail wag? That means you're his favorite." Tommy giggled, and Hank leaned against his leg with a happy groan. Jackson came outside carrying a toolbox. "Gonna fix that slope today," he said. "Bulldog's coming by after lunch to help." "Good," Meadow replied. "Tommy's going to be a race car driver on that ramp once it's level." Tommy clapped his hands. "Can we paint flames on the sides?" Jackson chuckled. "Sure, kid. Flames it is." That evening, Meadow walked into town to pick up a few groceries. The air was cooler now, with hints of rain on the wind. She carried a list Jackson had written on the back of an envelope: bread, coffee, dog food, cereal, and tucked a few dollars of her own into her pocket. The grocery store bell jingled when she entered. The usual cashier, Linda, looked up from behind the counter but didn't smile. A couple of church ladies from Meadow's old Bible study stood near the produce aisle whispering, their heads close together like sparrows sharing secrets. "Evening, ladies," Meadow said politely as she passed. Their chatter died for a second, replaced by tight smiles. "Evening," one murmured before turning away. She kept walking, pretending not to notice the glances that followed her. She focused on her list: bread, coffee, cereal, dog food. When she reached the register, Linda rang up the items without making eye contact. "That'll be $18.42, she said flatly. Meadow handed her the cash, waited for her change, and said, "Thank you." Linda hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You really staying out there? With him?" Meadow blinked. "With Jackson and Tommy?" "Yes. I'm helping the boy." Linda's lips pressed tight. "People are talking, Meadow. You might want to think about what that looks like." Meadow's throat tightened. "Looks like kindness," she said quietly. "At least, that's what I hope it looks like." She took her bag and walked out before Linda could reply. By the time she got back, twilight was spreading across the fields. The ramp was fixed, stronger, smoother, and freshly painted red. Tommy sat at the top, waving a small American flag, while Bulldog, a burly man with a wild beard and kind eyes, grinned proudly beside him. "Hey there, Angel Nurse," Bulldog boomed. "You should have seen this little dude. He told us where every nail should go." Tommy laughed. "I'm the boss." Meadow smiled, setting down the groceries. "Well, Mr. Boss, I brought you your favorite cereal." He clapped his hands in delight. Jackson emerged from the shed, wiping his hands on a rag. "You went into town?" "Yes," Meadow said, keeping her tone light. "Got what we needed." He caught the flicker of something in her expression. "They giving you trouble?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Just talk. People don't understand what they don't see for themselves." Jackson's jaw tensed. "Let 'em talk. You don't owe this town anything." "I do," she said softly. "I owe them the chance to see better." That made him go quiet for a moment. Finally he nodded, slow and thoughtful. After supper, Bulldog stayed to eat, filling the house with laughter and stories that made Tommy giggle so hard his face turned red. Meadow noticed how different Jackson was around his old friend, more relaxed, almost young again. When she started clearing dishes, Bulldog stopped her. "Hey, Miss Meadow, let me help. I used to work in a diner before I got into bikes. I can wash a plate faster than a preacher can find a verse." She laughed, handing him a towel. "Then you're hired." He leaned close, lowering his voice. "You know, nobody's ever stuck around this long. Not since—" He trailed off, glancing toward Jackson. Meadow nodded. "I know, and I'm not leaving." His grin softened into something like respect. "You got more backbone than all of us combined." When Bulldog left later that night, Jackson stood by the door, watching his friend ride off into the dark. Meadow came to stand beside him. "Thank you for fixing the ramp," she said. He nodded. "Tommy slept better tonight. Guess he needed more than medicine." "So did you," she said gently. Jackson looked down at her, the porch light catching the edge of his jaw. "You got a habit of being right, you know that?" "Not really," she said with a smile. "I just pay attention." The next morning, Meadow went out to get the mail and found an envelope tucked into the box. Her name was written across it in careful cursive. Inside was a letter from her church. "Dear Miss Carter, we have received word of your recent circumstances and associations. Until clarification is made, we kindly ask that you refrain from participating in church activities or representing the congregation in public matters." Her hands trembled. The wind caught the paper and almost tore it away. She pressed it to her chest and stood still for a long time. When she went back inside, Tommy noticed her face. "Are you okay, Miss Meadow?" She smiled weakly. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just thinking." He nodded and returned to coloring, humming softly to himself. Jackson watched her from across the room, eyes narrowing. "They send you something?" "Yes," she said quietly. "A reminder that sometimes doing good looks wrong to people who don't understand." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You don't gotta prove nothing to them." She met his gaze. "Maybe not, but I do need to keep proving it to myself." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, the house glowed with a fragile peace. For the first time, Meadow realized that the kindness she'd given Tommy had started to ripple outward, to his father, his friends, maybe even to the town that didn't yet know it needed healing. And though the town's whispers grew louder, so did her faith. In a small farmhouse off Route 16, hope had started to take root, and it wasn't done growing yet. The next week began with gray skies and a steady drizzle, the kind that made everything smell like rain-soaked earth and pine. Meadow didn't mind the weather. She liked the quiet rhythm of the drops tapping against the roof, the way it made the house feel wrapped in peace. Inside, the Jensen farmhouse had changed, subtly but unmistakably. The laughter of a child, the steady sound of Jackson's boots on the floor, and the low hum of hope had settled in like part of the furniture. Each morning, Meadow rose early to make breakfast. Jackson always pretended he didn't notice how she'd quietly add things to the grocery list: fresh fruit, whole grain bread, vitamins for Tommy. He'd grumble about the cost, but every time he paid for it anyway. "Kid needs it," he'd mutter. "Can't have him living off bacon and coffee like me." Meadow smiled. "Then maybe we'll work on both of you." Tommy's therapy was going better than anyone expected. He had begun to sit up straighter in his chair, using his arms with more confidence. Each time Meadow praised him, his grin stretched wider. "Look, Miss Meadow," he said one morning, pushing himself an inch forward. "I can do it without falling." "You sure can," she said, clapping softly. "That's what happens when you don't give up." Jackson, who'd been leaning in the doorway, said quietly, "Never thought I'd see him smile like that again." "You're seeing it because you're here," she said. "He knows you believe in him." He nodded, but his eyes carried that flicker of guilt that never quite left. A few days later, Meadow gathered the courage to walk into Pine Hollow's small church pantry to ask for supplies for Tommy's care. Pastor Paul wasn't there, but his wife, Sarah, stood behind the counter sorting canned goods. "Good morning, Sarah," Meadow said gently. Sarah smiled warmly. "Meadow, I was hoping you'd come by. How's the little boy?" "He's improving every day," Meadow said. "We've been working on therapy at home. He's brave." "That's wonderful," Sarah said. Then her smile dimmed. "But I have to tell you, not everyone's been as understanding. There's been talk." "I know," Meadow said softly. "I hear it when I go into town." Sarah sighed. People see what they want to see. They forget that the Lord sat with outcasts and healed the broken. Then maybe they need reminding, Meadow said, gathering the cans Sarah handed her. You remind them just by showing up, Sarah said kindly. Don't lose that light. That afternoon, Bulldog and 2 other bikers showed up at the farmhouse, their engines rumbling like thunder as they rolled up the drive. Meadow was hanging laundry on the line when they arrived. Afternoon, ma'am, Bulldog called out, lifting his hand in greeting. Jackson said you could use some help with the roof. She smiled. You're a blessing, all of you. Just be careful. It's slick up there. The men exchanged looks of surprise at being called blessings. Then they went to work. Inside, Tommy peered out the window. Daddy's friends are nice, he said. They are, Meadow replied. Sometimes people just need a chance to show what's already good in them. When the work was done, Meadow brought out a tray of lemonade. The men accepted their cups awkwardly, unsure what to do with her kindness. Don't suppose anyone's prayed for us in a while, one biker joked, scratching his beard. Then today's your lucky day, Meadow said with a smile. Mind if I do? The laughter faded into silence. Even Jackson, who had come to stand behind her, looked at her in quiet wonder as she bowed her head. Lord, she said softly, thank you for strong hands and willing hearts. Thank you for the courage it takes to change, and for the grace to start over. When she finished, the big men muttered Amen under their breath, awkward but sincere. As the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day, the air filled with something new, something lighter than the rain. Later that week, Jackson drove Meadow into town to pick up supplies. It was the first time they'd gone together, and he looked uneasy behind the wheel of his truck, his tattooed hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tight. You don't have to come, Meadow said gently. I can manage. He shook his head. You took enough heat on your own. Figure it's time they see I can stand beside you. When they parked in front of the grocery store, conversations inside seemed to stop for half a second. Eyes turned their way. Jackson stood tall, but his jaw clenched. Meadow just smiled, nodded politely, and walked to the produce aisle like she didn't notice the stares. When the cashier hesitated to greet them, Jackson dropped his wallet on the counter with a thud. We're all paid up, he said. You can save the judgment for someone else. The room went quiet again. Then Sarah Whitman, who happened to be shopping nearby, stepped forward, smiling kindly. Good afternoon, Meadow, she said brightly. And Jackson, it's good to see you. Her warm tone cut through the tension like sunlight. Slowly, others nodded or murmured polite greetings. Meadow caught Jackson's faint grin as they left the store. See? She said softly. It only takes one brave voice to change the sound of a room. That evening, they invited Bulldog and the crew back for supper. Meadow made chicken stew with cornbread, and Jackson set out extra chairs around the old wooden table. The house filled with noise and laughter as the bikers told stories about their younger, wilder days. Tommy giggled at every exaggerated tale, and when someone let out a loud whoop, even Jackson laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. You boys ever think about using all this energy for something good? Meadow asked playfully as she refilled their bowls. Bulldog grinned. Like what? A choir? Maybe, Meadow teased. Or helping out around town, fixing roofs, repairing fences, things you're already good at. The room went quiet for a moment as her words sank in. Then one of the men said, You mean us? Helping the same folks who cross the street when they see us? Yes, Meadow said calmly. Because kindness doesn't need an invitation. Jackson leaned back in his chair, looking at her with quiet pride. You really believe people can change, don't you? I do, she said. I've seen it happen. A few days later, the proof arrived. Bulldog and his friends showed up in town to repair an elderly woman's broken porch steps. No charge. Someone took a photo for the local paper, and the headline the next morning read, "Former Bikers Help Local Widow. Acts of Kindness Spreading in Pine Hollow." Meadow found the paper folded neatly on the kitchen table, Jackson's coffee mug beside it. "Guess you started something," he said with a grin. "We all did," she replied. And when Tommy rolled into the kitchen, holding a crayon drawing of their little family, her, his father, himself, and the dog, Meadow knew that something more than goodwill was growing here. It was belonging. And it was just the beginning. Morning sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, washing the old farmhouse in gold. The rain had finally cleared, and the smell of fresh earth drifted through the open windows. Meadow hummed softly as she flipped pancakes on the stove. From the living room came the soft creak of Tommy's wheelchair and his cheerful humming as he colored. When Jackson entered, his hair still damp from an early shower, he paused for a moment just to take in the sight. The woman at his stove looked like she belonged there. Calm, steady, bringing warmth where there used to be silence. "Smells good," he said, reaching for a plate. "Eat before you run off to the shop," Meadow replied, smiling. "You'll need strength for all that good you're planning to do today." He chuckled. "Bulldog's already got the crew heading out to help fix Mrs. Whittle's roof. Never thought I'd see the day she'd say yes to us being on her property." Meadow turned, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Mrs. Whittle? The same woman who evicted me?" "The very one," Jackson said, grinning. "Guess she figured free labor don't care about gossip." Meadow laughed softly, setting a plate in front of him. "Well, Grace has a way of sneaking in through broken shingles." By mid-morning, the air was alive with the sound of hammers and laughter. From the porch, Meadow watched Jackson's friends working on Mrs. Whittle's roof across the field. Their laughter carried across the yard, deep, rough, but genuine. Tommy sat beside her in his chair, drawing what he saw. "Look, Miss Meadow," he said, holding up the paper. "They're angels fixing the roof." "Angels?" she said with a smile. "Yeah," he said seriously. "Daddy says angels don't always wear white. Sometimes they wear leather." Her heart swelled. "Your daddy's right." That evening, Sarah Whitman stopped by with a basket of cornbread and a hesitant smile. "I heard about the repairs," she said. "The whole town's talking. They can't believe it." "Believe it," Meadow said gently. "Sometimes people need to see love in motion before they can name it." Sarah nodded. "You've started something good here, Meadow. The pastor's thinking of hosting a service out at your place next Sunday, an outdoor one. Said maybe it's time the church came to the people instead of the other way around." For a moment, Meadow couldn't speak. "I'd like that," she said finally. "If Jackson's all right with it." When she told him later, he froze mid-step, wiping his hands on his jeans. "At my place? They'd never come." "They will," Meadow said softly, "because you've already shown them what faith looks like." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But if the pastor tries preaching too long, I'm serving burgers halfway through." She laughed. "Deal." The following Sunday dawned bright and warm. Folding chairs filled the yard, and the smell of grilled meat mixed with the sound of guitar strings. Children played near the porch. Old Mrs. Whittle brought her famous peach cobbler, insisting she wanted to see the fuss for herself. When Pastor Paul began to speak, his voice trembled slightly. "We've all heard the story of the Good Samaritan," he said. "But sometimes, Grace looks like a nurse who lost everything for doing what's right, and a man who decided to build instead of break." Eyes turned toward Meadow and Jackson. She felt her cheeks warm, but didn't look away. Jackson gave a small, embarrassed shrug, then reached down and took Tommy's hand. After the closing prayer, laughter and music filled the yard again. Bulldog's crew served food. The pastor played harmonica with surprising skill. Even Mrs. Whittle laughed when Hank the dog tried to steal her cobbler. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, Meadow stood near the porch steps, her heart full. Jackson came up beside her, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "You did this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, we did this." He looked out at the crowd. The town that once scorned him now sitting in his yard, talking and laughing like family. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Never thought I'd see peace like this again." "You built it with your hands," she said. "And with your heart." He gave her a long look, something unspoken shining in his eyes. "You changed everything, Meadow." She smiled, her voice steady. "No, Jackson. God just used us both to remind this town what love looks like." As the last light of evening fell across the fields, the old farmhouse glowed like a lantern. Proof that even the hardest hearts can heal when grace is given a place to rest. The morning of the town charity fair broke bright and cloudless, the kind of day that felt like a promise. Meadow dressed Tommy in his favorite flannel shirt and helped him into his braces. He was nervous, his small hands trembling as he adjusted the straps. "What if I fall, Miss Meadow?" he whispered. She knelt beside him, smiling softly. "Then you'll get back up. That's what brave people do." Jackson stood nearby, arms folded, pretending to be calm, but Meadow could see the worry in his eyes. "We don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, we do," she replied. "He's ready. The town needs to see the strength you've both built." By mid-morning, the Pine Hollow Park buzzed with laughter, the smell of popcorn, and the squeak of balloons. A small crowd gathered near the temporary stage, where a local reporter waited with her camera. The event raised money for children's rehabilitation, a cause Meadow had quietly helped organize through Sarah and the pastor. When Tommy's name was called, the chatter faded. Meadow wheeled him to the edge of the stage. He looked up at her, wide-eyed. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered. "Slow steps. Breathe. I'll be right here." Jackson stood just behind them, his rough hands trembling slightly. With everyone watching, Tommy took his first step forward. His braces clinked softly, his face tight with focus. Then another step, and another. The crowd gasped, then broke into applause. Meadow's eyes filled with tears. "You're doing it, sweetheart," she whispered. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. He had never looked prouder. When Tommy reached the center of the stage, he turned and raised his arms, grinning from ear to ear. "I did it!" he shouted. The crowd cheered louder. The local paper photographer snapped a picture, capturing the moment forever. The boy in braces, the smiling nurse beside him, and the burly father wiping away tears he pretended weren't there. Afterward, the reporter asked Jackson for a comment. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. "My boy didn't walk because of luck," he said. "He walked because someone believed in him when no one else would." The paper headline the next morning read, "Biker's Son Walks Again. Hope in Pine Hollow." The article spread quickly through town. People who once whispered now smiled at Meadow in the street. Children waved at Jackson when he passed. That evening, back at the farmhouse, Tommy sat at the kitchen table, drawing himself walking across the stage. "You think I can do it again tomorrow?" he asked. Meadow brushed his hair back gently. "You can do it every day, Tommy. Maybe not with your legs, but always with your heart." Jackson caught her gaze across the room, eyes shining. "You gave us back more than walking," he said softly. "You gave us faith." And for the first time, the Jensen farmhouse felt not just like a home, but a miracle. The joy from the fair still lingered in the farmhouse, but it didn't last long. A week later, Meadow found a letter slipped beneath the door. The envelope bore the Pine Hollow Hospital seal. Her stomach twisted before she even opened it. Inside was a formal notice accusing her of unauthorized medical practice and misuse of supplies. Worse yet, the local paper printed the story the next morning. Her name in bold, her kindness turned into scandal. When she stepped into town for groceries, conversations stopped mid-sentence. People who had smiled at her days ago now crossed the street. Even the church doors felt heavier when she tried to enter for prayer. That evening, Jackson found her on the porch, staring out at the dark horizon. "They printed lies," he said, voice tight with anger. "I'll go down there and make them eat their words." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, Jackson. Fighting won't change hearts. We can't meet hate with hate." He clenched his fists. "You shouldn't have to stand alone." "I'm not alone," she said quietly. "As long as we keep doing good, the truth will find its way out." But later that night, when Tommy's fever spiked from stress, Meadow's faith wavered. She sat beside his bed, holding a cool cloth to his forehead, whispering prayers through tears. "Lord," she said softly, "I don't understand why kindness hurts this much, but please, don't let this family lose hope." Down the hall, Jackson stood in the doorway, helpless. For the first time since they'd met, he saw Meadow's strength tremble and realized how much she'd carried for all of them. The storm had come back to Pine Hollow. But this time, it wasn't just outside. Rain pounded the farmhouse roof, echoing the heaviness in every heart inside. Tommy lay asleep, weak but stable after a long night of fever. Meadow sat by the window, watching lightning flicker across the hills. Her eyes were red, her hands clasped tight in prayer. Jackson stood behind her, arms crossed, guilt written all over his face. "You should have never gotten dragged into my mess," he said quietly. "You lost your job, your friends, everything, just because of us." She turned, shaking her head. "I didn't lose anything that mattered. I still have purpose. I still have you two." But Jackson didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the table where his old motorcycle keys lay. He picked them up, staring at them like a man seeing a ghost from another life. "I can't watch them tear you apart," he muttered. "Not for helping us." "Jackson, please, don't do anything foolish." He slipped on his jacket, raincoat forgotten. "I just need to fix this, Meadow, somehow." Before she could stop him, he was gone. Motorcycle roaring into the storm, tail light vanishing, down the road. Meadow sank to her knees, heart pounding. "Lord, keep him safe," she whispered. Tommy stirred from his bed, eyes half open. "Miss Meadow, Daddy's not leaving us, is he?" She forced a trembling smile. "No, sweetheart. He's trying to make things right." When the house grew quiet again, she sat beside the boy and held his hand. The storm raged outside, but she refused to move. Hours passed. Every thunderclap felt like a heartbeat calling Jackson's name. And though fear clawed at her, Meadow stayed, kneeling in the dim light, whispering prayers into the storm, because sometimes faith meant staying when everything else ran away. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the roads slick and shining under gray clouds. Meadow barely slept. Every time a car passed, her heart leapt, hoping it was Jackson. When the sound of a motorcycle finally broke the silence, she ran to the porch. But Jackson didn't stop. He sped straight toward town, face set with purpose. She watched until he disappeared down the road, then whispered, "Lord, go with him." In Pine Hollow's town square, the morning bustle came to a halt as Jackson parked his bike outside the courthouse. Rain dripped from his jacket as he pushed through the doors of the public meeting where the hospital board gathered. Conversations died instantly. He walked to the front, set an envelope on the table, and spoke with a steady voice. "This is every dollar I got from selling my bike. It's a donation to start a children's wing at your hospital. Name it after the woman you tried to ruin, Meadow Carter." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jackson's gaze swept the room. "You called her a thief, but she gave more than any of us ever did. She gave my boy hope." The silence that followed was thick with shame and awe. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, others joined. Soon the room filled with applause, not for Jackson alone, but for the truth. When he finally walked back outside, the clouds had broken, sunlight spilling over the street. He tilted his face toward the light, whispering a rough prayer. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." Far away, at the farmhouse, Meadow felt peace wash over her chest, as if her heart already knew. The storm had turned into grace. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By evening, Pine Hollow buzzed with talk of the man who rode into town to defend the woman everyone had condemned. The next morning's paper carried a picture of Jackson standing in the courthouse doorway, sunlight spilling behind him. The headline read, "Ex-biker donates to children's wing. Town humbled by act of grace." When Meadow saw it, tears filled her eyes. She sat at the kitchen table, one hand pressed over her mouth. Tommy rolled up beside her. "He fixed it, didn't he?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "He fixed it with love." That afternoon, cars began to drive out to the farmhouse. Neighbors, church, members, even old friends who had once turned away. They came bearing flowers, casseroles, and shy apologies. Meadow welcomed each one, her heart open. Later, the hospital announced the new name of its rehabilitation project, the Tommy Jensen Children's Wing, dedicated to hope, courage, and second chances. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Pastor Paul prayed over the land while Jackson stood beside Meadow, holding Tommy's hand. Cameras flashed, but no one cared about fame, only about the miracle of redemption standing before them. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah Whitman hugged Meadow tightly. "You didn't just change a family," she whispered. "You changed this whole town." Jackson looked around at the faces once filled with judgment, now softened with grace. "Guess people can learn after all," he said quietly. Meadow smiled. They just needed to see what forgiveness looks like. Behind them, Tommy's laughter echoed through the crisp air, bright, free, and full of promise. Pine Hollow, once divided by pride, had found its heart again. Summer warmed Pine Hollow, turning the hills gold. The new hospital wing was nearly finished, sunlight flashing off its windows like a promise. Meadow and Tommy visited often, walking hand in hand past the workers. On the front wall, a bronze plaque already gleamed. "The Tommy Jensen Rehabilitation Wing, built by love." Tommy grinned. "That's my name. Daddy says we helped build hope." "You sure did," Meadow said, smiling. "Hope takes all kinds of builders." Back at the farmhouse, life had found its gentle rhythm again. Jackson ran a small garage in the barn, teaching local teens to repair old bikes. Bulldog came by most afternoons, claiming he only stayed for Meadow's lemonade. Laughter had become part of the air there. Steady, honest, healing. One Saturday evening, the town gathered for a cookout. Fireflies danced above the grass, and the smell of barbecue carried across the field. Pastor Paul said a short prayer, thanking God for grace that rides in on unexpected wheels. Meadow stood on the porch, watching Jackson show Tommy how to polish a chrome handle. The boy giggled, his braces catching the firelight. "Miss Meadow," Tommy said suddenly, "Daddy says even folks with grease on their hands can be angels. Is that true?" She looked down at him, her eyes soft. "It's the truest thing I know." Jackson glanced up, meeting her gaze. As the sun sank behind the hills, Meadow whispered, "Sometimes God really does send his angels in leather jackets." And with that, the world felt at peace, simple, redeemed, and full of grace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.